Welcome, everyone, to the Intersection Podcast. For those of you new to the pod, The Intersection is a project of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. It's a space for advocacy and healthcare leaders to talk to each other and share how they're trying to build anti-racist healthcare systems. You can find us online at meetattheintersection.org. I'm your host, Anton Gunn, and today we're going to dive into the topic of birth justice. I'm happy to be joined by three monumental guests who are leading and prioritizing compassionate, patient-centered approaches to improving reproductive care. First is Leseiley Welch, co-founder and chief executive officer at Birth Center Equity, and Jamarah Amani, midwife, executive director at Southern Birth Justice Network, and Chanel Porchia-Albert, co-director and director of equity and program strategy at JustBirth Space. I appreciate you all joining me today. To center our discussion, I want to start with defining birth justice. Reproductive justice means that every person has the right to bodily autonomy and privacy, to have children or not have children, and be able to parent children in a safe and sustainable community. Is there anything else y'all would add to that definition? And I'm going to start with you, Jamarah.
Myself, I started in the reproductive justice movement, working with the California Black Women's Health Project and Black Infant Health in California, and then went to Atlanta to work with Sister Song, and we helped to organize the March for Women's Lives in 2004, which at that time was the largest march in the United States. And through that march, it was really an opportunity to let the world, the country, know what reproductive justice is. And for me as a young Black mother, I was like, I need more definition around the birthing part of it, because a lot of the movement at that time was centered around abortion rights and access. Mm-hmm. And I was a young Black mom and really looking for like, well, where is it talking about pregnancy and birth and breastfeeding and, can I breastfeed at work? And what are my parenting rights to make sure that my family is respected? I wasn't seeing that as prominent in reproductive justice at that time. That's what led me to, one, want to be a midwife, and two, work with other young Black mothers to build this definition of birth justice. We worked with a women's shelter called Lotus House in Overtown, Miami, to flesh out that question of what does it mean to birth with justice? And we came up with the birth justice framework. When you read the birth justice framework, it says that it recognizes that people of color, immigrant people, LGBTQ plus communities in particular, have survived a history of trauma and oppression around our decisions to have and not have babies, get to decide when we give birth, how we give birth, with whom, where. All of those should be autonomous decisions. And we should have access to healers, midwives, doulas, and every birthing profession that we want to be part of our team. All of those options should be available to everyone. That's central to reproductive justice, is this question of how do we birth with justice?
Wow, you broke that down in ways that I couldn't have imagined. But I want to zero in on, you said something about historical oppression as it relates to the disparities faced by Black women in care. What are some of those historical and systemic factors that has put us in the place that we're in now in terms of a maternal health crisis in the United States? Can you color that to me with just a couple little points of what that looks like?
So we know that the roots of gynecology and obstetrics in this country are racist. I like to uplift the names of Anarcha, Betsy, and Lucy, who are the mothers of gynecology. They are three of the women whose names we know that were experimented on by the so-called father of gynecology, J. Marion Sims. There used to be a statue of him in Central Park, which was removed, and his legacy is disgraced, but in many circles, he's still uplifted as the founder or father of gynecology. And we have to call out that legacy because he experimented and operated on and really tortured Black women without consent, without anesthesia, in horrific ways. And a lot of the procedures, the theories, the philosophies, the techniques, even the physical tools that are still used in obstetric care were developed by J. Marion Sims and his peers of that time. And so we have to call it out because it's so foundational to even the way that obstetrics and gynecology is done in this country today. And what happened during that time is that they sidelined the Black midwives. Black midwives were the primary healthcare providers for pregnancy for most people in this country, and particularly in the South. So the American Medical Association in 1857 set out a campaign against midwives and really against abortion at the same time to launch these racist and sexist attacks on Black midwives across the South. This was led by primarily white, wealthy male doctors in an effort to displace Black midwives and to center themselves as the primary care providers for pregnancy and birth. And that led to the Shepherd-Towner Act of 1921, which restricted and criminalized midwifery across the South, which is largely what we still have today. And we're fighting our way back and reclaiming that legacy that was stolen from Black midwives. But this is definitely fraught with the history of white supremacy, slavery, and colonization in this country.
Wow. Thank you for that, Jamarah. Thank you. And Chanel and Leseiley, I want to bring you into this conversation. Again, the three of you are dynamic in the work that you do. But I really want to ask a real practical question that given the times that we're currently in, what is it like to do this work in this moment in our nation's history? So I'm going to start with you, Chanel.
I'm glad that you started off with talking about history because history really lays a foundation and context for where we are right now. I didn't live during the 60s era or the 50s or Jim Crow. Some of the ways in which the policies that are being brought forth today are reminiscent of what I have read historically, right? And I believe that history runs in cycles. And that when we pay attention to history, we know that there are certain things that present themselves that also give us a blueprint for how to actively resist. Right now, as we are speaking, Medicaid is on the chopping block, right? There is the potential for Medicaid to be defunded in many aspects where postpartum care or miscarriage support is going to be completely slashed, right? Or, advocates like myself who have fought tirelessly over the years for Medicaid dual reimbursement. Right now, in the community that we're serving, people are afraid to go out and get health care. Program funding is being cut, so it's making everything more expensive. We'll see an increase in maternal mortality and morbidity. We'll see an increase in pregnancy-related complications because people are not being able to have access to covered healthcare services. And so right now, we're just trying to find ways to mitigate fears, mitigate insurance fears, mitigate fears around access to resources, mitigate fears around what's going to happen tomorrow and what else is going to be on the chopping block. Maternal health funding, just in terms of grants, is drying up. People are restructuring what their focus is, and or they find themselves saying, I don't want to touch this subject right now. We've seen how advocates, all of us, have worked towards getting maternal mortality review committees so that we can really show the data behind what's happening and why Black women and birthing people are dying. And all of that is being pulled away, right? All of that is systematically being pulled away. And I don't think what people really fully understand is that when it affects Black women, it also affects everybody else. That disassociation that we're seeing, we have responsibilities, not just to our larger community, but to the people who work for us, ensure that they are able to sustain themselves and their families and, their own livelihood and healthcare. And there's a lot of uncertainty around what that looks like for the next 3 years, hopefully, if that's it. But yeah.
Leseiley, love to hear from you.
It's hard, it's stressful, it's heartbreaking. These systems that we're seeing undermined now were never designed with our health and well-being at the center as Black, Indigenous, and people of color, or as women, or as queer and trans folks. Like, these were not systems designed for us in the first place. These were not systems that worked well for us. Now it's just getting worse, right? We're seeing across the board that be made more difficult for this network of more than 58 birth center leaders and midwives. I spent time with one of our midwives and birth center leaders on a call last Friday, end of the week, where she said, I'm just exhausted. It would be easier for me to go be a nurse practitioner somewhere and then continue to be a nurse midwife and run my birth center in my community. And she's being faced with the closure of OB practices, the closure of local hospitals, and then having people be sent to her birth center that actually don't even qualify for birth center care because there's nowhere else to go. I feel as a leader, part of the responsibility we embrace is this idea of straddling earth and sky, being in the moment and doing things like providing rapid response grants and immediate resources and acknowledging the immediate harm that's happening, but also putting forth a vision or a North Star to pull people toward the creation of something better, holding a vision that we will outlive and outlast this moment.
Wow. That was very centering and very grounding of the challenges that are ahead of all of us. We did an event together recently, and there was a few questions that came in. And the first question I want to get you to expand on this concept that, hospital systems should be collaborative partners, making sure that physicians, midwives, and doulas, they all partner together to get to the best outcomes. But I wanted to ask you, are there specific steps that a hospital system can take to improve that respectful collaboration? I'll start with you, Chanel.
Again, it all starts with intentionality and creating intentional space for conversation, right? The community-based organizations, the birthing centers, the mom groups that have had a long standing relationship within the community should be reached out to, right? To have a conversation around what are you currently seeing, developing a community advisory board that encompasses all of the organizations within that specific area that they are serving. You build that coalition of support where you're designing for equity, right? You're designing towards understanding what healthcare models are going to best work within that institution so that you can have a responsive care network as opposed to reactionary. And then it is understanding that there may need to be a point within those conversations that because of the history of that institution or the ways in which they've engaged with community in previous ways, there may need to be like conversations around reconciliation. What does reconciliation look like? What does accountability look like in that space? What does self-accountability look like as well as institutional accountability so that there could be build up a network of trust? I think those are just some of the foundational things. But above all else, there has to be a willingness. There has to be a willingness to have those hard conversations to even move the needle in the right direction. And then designing what it is that you want to see, co-creating. And I think we're going to really need that now, where folks are really being intentional about de-siloing work, because we're not going to be able to do this alone.
Fantastic. Leseiley, I know you came out of public health and you started with a particular connection with a health system. So how would you recommend them start that process if it's any different than what Chanel has said or any finer point detail you would put on it for us?
I would just say, in terms of relationship building, one place to start is to start with your midwifery-led organizations in your community and in your state, to start with birth justice organizations in your community or community birth centers, and to start with relationship building from the beginning, from the ground up. Once you have some inkling or understanding of your local landscape, then call in expert or national help if you need it. So it's one of the things that we exist to help birth centers and communities with is facilitation of this kind of work in partnership for the betterment and increase access to midwifery care wherever people are.
Very good. Jamarah, how about you?
So I love what was already shared. And I'll just say the very first thing I think is to sit down and be humble. You have to take on a posture of being willing to learn from community. And I agree with what Leseiley said about looking into what are the local midwife partners that we can work with. There's also the National Black Midwives Alliance, which I'm a co-founder of. You can join as an ally member at blackmidwives.org. And that's a way to just, be in a space of learning from Black midwives and to support with your dollars and with your membership what Black midwives are leading and doing already. Because a lot of what needs to be created already exists. It just needs to be implemented into those specific institutions. I would also say that within hospital systems, there are usually champions. Every hospital I've ever walked into, I try to find that doctor, that resident, that nurse that's like, I had my baby with a midwife. Or, I'm from Jamaica and I used to be a midwife there, but when I came to the US, I became a labor and delivery nurse. There are just those stories that are really in every institution. So identifying who are those champions that already have some of those community ties. And the thing is that, yes, it is about partnering with birth workers, but it's also just about being in community.
Awesome. Fantastic. Now, I have a selfish question. I'm going to just go ahead and claim it as a selfish question. How can the movement of reproductive health and justice be aided by men? I'm going to start with you, Leseiley.
What I would advocate for is that the movement can be aided by men who lift up their voices and experience. And we need male voices in the movement. And I think about it in a broader way that all of us across gender, across age, across professions need to invest in changing how we do birth in this country. As Jamarah said, it's not that we just need more midwives or more doulas. The way we do healthcare financing need to change. A lot of men are in charge of how we do healthcare financing and distribute investment capital in this country. Change it so that it supports midwifery care. The way that we do workforce development, the way that we do our policies and regulations, culture, and even media. I think that we all have a part to play in shifting and changing how we invest in birth in this country and how we decenter medicalized births in this country.
Very good. Chanel, anything to add?
When male partners come into play, their focus is oftentimes on how am I recovering for a situation, right? Thinking about like the financial aspects of things. What is my role in terms of being a father, whether it be spiritually, emotionally? That because we have not necessarily taught men how to engage emotionally within the birthing experience, because we've always said that's not your role. I tell people from the jump, like, you're pregnant too. There's an invisible umbilical cord that's connecting you to this human being. And I think when we start to involve them in that questioning, that inquisitiveness, that internal reflection, it opens up a conversation for like greater support. I've been in rooms where Black men in particular have had the police called on them for trying to advocate for their wives. I've seen Black men dehumanized in that space, right? And it just brings me back to, again, what Jamarah talks about, the historical aspect of how families were forcibly separated. But there's this perception of Black men that they're automatically aggressive. The minute you assert yourself or you even have bass in your voice, that is going to be escalated to another level. It's really saying you can still be who you are. You can still take control and center your family, while also you should be able to voice yourself and articulate yourself and whatever it is that you all want for yourself and for your family without fear of being criminalized at the site of birth.
Fantastic. Jamarah, how about you?
Janelle's point about criminalization of Black fathers is really what was on my mind. But I'll just say that as a midwife, some of the most favorite moments that I can remember from births were moments where the father was really involved. And I'm grateful that as a midwife, that's like a regular part of my job and my life, but it should be a regular part of healthcare, right? Where we center and involve the partner or whoever that birthing person wants to have involved in the process. And they're not just sidelined in the room or go stand over there or we'll come get you or the ways that happens. So we really advocate for a family-centered approach, even in surgical birth, even when it has to be a C-section. There are dads that can still help receive that baby and place the baby on to the mother's chest. We can reimagine the way things are done to center the family. I just really want to give a shout out to birthing people who do not identify as women. So there are non-binary birthing people and there are trans men who give birth. And so when you say, how can men be more involved? My first thought really was trans men.
Mm-hmm.
A mother of a trans masculine son. And I know many trans masculine people who have given birth. And we have to create the space for all of our birthing institutions and care practices to be inclusive.
Mm-hmm.
Southern Birth Justice Network, we teach a workshop called Trans Awareness for birth workers. We want all birth workers to have the information to be able to support queer and trans birthing people. And that's something that often gets left out of the conversation. We know from many years of going back to history that gender is diverse and that these really restrictive definitions of gender are more modern and more part of colonization. And so part of decolonizing birth is also decolonizing our understandings of gender so that we can include everyone in our community.
Great. Well, thank you for definitely elevating that. I'll tell you, the reason why I selfishly asked the question, what could men do? And this is going to lead into my closing question for you all is why you do this work and what keeps you going. And for me, it's grounded in my personal experience. I'm the father of one daughter who is now 20 years old. When she was born, my wife and I had a very traumatic experience, a very traumatic birthing experience. My wife went into labor on Christmas Day, which was not what we were expecting because our daughter was due January 20th. I would never forget she was due on Inauguration Day. And that's how I remembered it. But in 2004, that Christmas Day, we had just moved into a new place and we're unpacking boxes and just having a good old time listening to holiday music. And the contractions started. And I dismissed them because no, they ain't real contractions. Those are Braxton Hicks contractions. That's what I'm telling my wife. And she's like, no, I think these are real. So we get into the car and we go to the hospital and we call her OBGYN practice, who has 6 physicians that we had talked to and met with before and had developed a rapport and relationship. But on Christmas night, they were all out of town and unavailable to us. And my wife is now in the hospital and a physician walks into a room, someone that we've never met, never had a conversation with, don't know our preferences, our interests. I don't even know what she knew or did not know, but whatever she did know, she was not interested in what we had to say. And I felt very helpless as a partner, as a husband in the process, that I had all of this trust in the medical practice, the hospital, and this doctor who I saw in a position of power over our experience. And needless to say, nothing went the way that my wife and I envisioned. And even after delivering the day after Christmas and taking our daughter home, my wife still wasn't whole from the experience, physically, mentally, or emotionally. And it charged me in a way. I was already involved in advocacy. I was already involved in organizing, but it significantly charged me to that this system of healthcare was not at all grounded in the experience of people who look like me. And the policies weren't grounded in that space. To your point about the criminalization of Black men, I had this clear fear of me getting too loud as a 6'5", 300-pound Black man, somebody coming in and pulling me away from my wife and my newborn daughter. So I do this work because I want the system to be better. And so my closing question for all of you is, why do you do this work? What keeps you going in the face of all the adversity, all of the history, all of the times, the funding cuts, the challenges that we all have laid out here? I really want to hear from each one of you on what keeps you doing this work. And I'm going to start with you, Jamarah.
Thank you for sharing your story. Part of our mission at Southern Birth Justice Network is storytelling, because it's in our stories that we find and share liberation with each other. And it's how we learn from the past and re-envision the future. So thank you, because it's so important that more fathers speak out. As you were talking, I thought of James Hogue from Fathers Assisting Mothers and Charles Johnson from For Care for Moms, great organizations that are organizing fathers to be more active in the birth room and in prenatal care, and even recognizing the signs of postpartum depression, assisting with breastfeeding. I mean, so many things that fathers can and do play an active role in. I do this work. I started really because of my own experience giving birth and not being respected and having my rights honored as a young Black mother, and then finding midwifery care and realizing oh, it can be different and I should do that for other women like myself. And what keeps me going really is the calling. I know that I'm called to do this work. My ancestors have commanded that I do this work. I hope to work myself out of business one day. And there's really nothing left for us to do but just like enjoy and celebrate and play with the children, because there's a midwife in every neighborhood and a birth center on every corner. That's what I envision to be our beautiful future that we're building. But until then, there's work to do. And right now, what I'm really motivated by is building the bridge between Black birth workers in the United States and Black birth workers in the continent of Africa. And so we have a program at Southern Birth Justice Network, the Midwifery Cultural Exchange, where we are taking Black birth workers across the Atlantic, many of them for the first time, going to Africa to learn traditions, to share knowledge, to donate, bring supplies, to help build birth centers there, and to bring some of that cultural wisdom back to the United States. And I'm really invested in seeing that program grow and flourish, and that we can globally build a movement for birth justice. And I think the more that we lock arms across borders, especially in the context of what's happening now internationally, I think it's time for us to deepen the solidarity amongst the global South worldwide. So birth unites all of us. To build a liberation movement is to start with birth and know that that's the foundation, the cornerstone of then how we build family and how we build community.
Thank you for sharing. Chanel, how about you? What keeps you going?
My kids, I'm a mother of 6. Oldest is 16, youngest is 7. They are what ushered me into this work to begin with, right? It's because of the ways in which I was treated, the care that I received from a midwife and a doula in my home birth, my first home birth. And so that work has led to policy and advocacy. It started with just direct services and seeing the ways in which individuals were treated within their birthing experiences and wanting to do something about it. But my children help to sustain me. I want them to be able to go and to either birth or not birth, whomever they choose to be with, to know that when they go into their birthing experience or their reproductive health experience, that they're able to make an informed decision about their care. And at the end of the day, there's nothing like seeing like a child who you helped come into the world and now they're walking down the street. It's a different kind of feeling when you can see someone really stand in the fact that they made a decision for themselves and they were able to get what they wanted for themselves and for their families.
Awesome. Thank you. Leseiley, how about you?
I would say for me, before I even had my own children, I entered healthcare work in aid service. And I was a hospice volunteer. I was a volunteer doula. And I firmly believe that how we enter and exit this world matters, that there's nothing more sacred. And I'm not a midwife. I'm not a clinician. I bring to this work a public health background, a business background, a women's and gender studies background. And I've also had a preterm baby like you. I've had a late term loss. I've had a rainbow baby. I've been with my brother when my nephew was born and died the same day in a local Detroit hospital. And so the work is profoundly personal to me, and it is part and parcel of my purpose. I tell people and I share freely that my prayer every day is that I might be the mother my children need me to be and the leader that my great-great-grandchildren need me to be. And the leader they need me to be is to bring to bear the skills I have to pull people together to truly change the culture of birth that we experience in the United States. And so what is inspiring me now is an initiative that Birth Center Equity will launch at the end of this year called Beloved Birth 50 by 50. And it is an audacious goal that by 2050, 50% of babies in the U.S. be born with the care of midwives. And it exists to mobilize folks, not just midwives and clinicians, but to mobilize folks across finance, across workforce, across policy, across culture, across health systems, to really build toward what we truly need to make midwifery care accessible to all of us who want and need it.
Wow. That was powerful and a great way for us to close. And Leseiley, Chanel, Jamarah, it's been a pleasure and a privilege to have you on The Intersection, to hear your insights and your vision for a transformed healthcare system. that prioritizes reproductive justice, especially for Black women. I want to thank the audience for listening to the Intersection podcast. And as always, visit us at meetattheintersection.org for more updates on future events and to join our mailing list. Thank you.